May 19, 1536. The air on Tower Green is thick with anticipation, a crowd buzzing with morbid curiosity. Anne Boleyn, once England's radiant queen, kneels before a French swordsman, her lips trembling in prayer. The blade flashes, and in a single stroke, her head falls, blood pooling on the scaffold. But the true horror begins now. For up to 30 seconds her severed head may have clung to a grotesque half-minute, where her eyes might have blinked, her lips twitched as if to speak, and her mind lingered in a fading awareness of her own death. This chilling possibility casts Anne Boleyn's execution in a light far darker than the swift swing of a sword, revealing a nightmare etched into one of history's most infamous moments. The science is as unsettling as it is undeniable. Medical accounts from the era, though crude, aligned with modern studies. A head severed from the body can retain oxygen in the brain, sustaining awareness for a fleeting window. Witnesses to Anne's execution reported a sight so disturbing it haunted them for years. Her eyes, wide beneath the blindfold, seemed to dart, as if searching for the crowd. Her lips, stained with whispered prayers, quivered, perhaps forming silent words as life ebbed away. Was she aware of the executioner holding her head aloft, its blood dripping onto the straw below? Did she sense the crowd's roar, a cacophony of jeers, orchestrated to drown her legacy? This fleeting consciousness transforms her death from a political act into a visceral horror, a moment where the boundary between life and death blurs into torment. For Anne, this possibility was the final cruelty in a meticulously staged execution. Henry VIII, her once ardent husband, had orchestrated her downfall with ruthless precision, branding her a traitor, an adulteress, to erase her from England's memory. The French swordsman, summoned from Calais at great expense, was no act of mercy, ensuring a clean cut for maximum spectacle. Yet, no amount of precision could erase the grim reality of those final seconds. As Anne knelt upright, a French tradition that demanded she hold still through sheer will, she faced not just death but the terror of lingering in it. Her blindfold, meant to shield her from the blade, heightened her dread, forcing her to strain for the sound of steel, slicing through air. Psychological torture amplified by the crowd. Fevered anticipation. This brief window of consciousness underscores the brutality of Tudor justice, where death was not enough. It had to be a performance. Anne's execution was designed to humiliate, to strip her of dignity, even as her head rolled. Witnesses fainted at the sight of her animated features, a grim reminder of humanity's fragility. Her ladies-in-waiting, tasked with wrapping her head in linen, recoiled in horror, their hands trembling as they touched a face that might still have seen them. For Anne Boleyn, those 30 seconds were the ultimate indignity, a queen reduced to a macabre spectacle. Her final thoughts trapped in a fading mind. This isn't just history. It's a warning of how power can turn even death into a theater of cruelty. We are left to wonder, what did Anne's eyes see in those final, fleeting moments? Did they see the shocked faces of her ladies-in-waiting, the indifference of the crowd, or perhaps the accusing gaze of history itself? In those last moments, Anne was more than a queen or a cautionary tale. She was a human being clinging to consciousness. Her story a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the depths of human cruelty. The image of her head, severed yet still living, is a stark reminder of the brutality that lurks beneath the surface of even the most civilized society. It's a testament to the human capacity for both tenderness and savagery. As we grapple with this unsettling possibility, we are confronted with the uncomfortable truth about our nature, capable of great tenderness, but also of astonishing cruelty. In Anne's story, we find a potent reminder of the darkness that can reside in the human heart. Her tragic fate serves as a stark warning, urging us to confront the darkness that can lurk within ourselves and within the institutions we create. Only by acknowledging this darkness can we hope to prevent such horrors from repeating themselves. Thank you for watching. In the cold shadows of the Tower of London, Anne Boleyn's execution on May 19, 1536 was far more than a swift beheading. It was the climax of a ruthless campaign to shatter her mind and erase her legacy. Beyond the blade's sharp edge, Henry VIII orchestrated a psychological torment so methodical it would rival modern torture tactics. Prolonged imprisonment, fabricated accusations, and public humiliation stripped Anne of her identity, transforming a once vibrant queen into a broken figure on a scaffold. Her death was not just an end but a calculated annihilation of her spirit and place in history. For 17 agonizing days, Anne languished in the Tower, the same fortress where she had once prepared for her coronation. The walls that once echoed with celebration now closed in on her, amplifying her dread. Henry deliberately delayed her execution, rescheduling it multiple times, a cruel tactic to keep her in limbo, never knowing when death would come. Each dawn brought fresh terror. Each footstep in the corridor a potential summons to the scaffold. Sleep eluded her. Tower records note her requesting the sacrament at 2 a.m., kneeling in desperate prayer as exhaustion fractured her mind. This uncertainty was no accident but a weapon designed to erode her resolve. False accusations fueled the assault on her psyche. Anne, once celebrated for her wit and charm, faced lurid charges of adultery, incest with her brother George, and plotting to murder the king. Claims so outrageous they defied reason. These lies, crafted by Thomas Cromwell, weren't meant to convince but to defame. Courtiers whispered tales of her supposed depravity, each rumor a dagger to her reputation. Anne was forced to hear these slanders, knowing they justified her doom and tainted her daughter Elizabeth's future. Her gallows humor, joking about being in sans teat, or Anne without a head masked, her soul unraveling under the weight of betrayal. Public humiliation completed the torture. On execution day, Anne faced a jeering crowd, encouraged to view her as a witch and traitor. The low scaffold, barely 3 feet high, robbed her of dignity, forcing her to climb mere steps before a mob baying for blood. Her final speech, praising Henry as a gentle sovereign, was a forced act of submission, spoken under the shadow of reprisals against her family. Henry's absence, as he celebrated his betrothal to Jane Seymour, was the final blow. A queen discarded, her worth reduced to nothing, and psychological destruction was no byproduct. It was Henry's goal, ensuring she was not just killed but unmade, her legacy buried in shame. This chilling campaign reveals a truth darker than death. Power can break a mind before a blade ever falls. Now, let's delve deeper into this harrowing tale. What were the whispers doing the rounds during Anne's imprisonment? How did these rumors take shape and what was their purpose? During Anne's imprisonment, rumors swirled like a tempest, each one a fresh wound upon her already battered psyche. The most salacious alleged that she'd committed adultery with her own brother, George. This grotesque accusation not only sullied her virtue, but painted a picture of a woman so depraved she'd violate the sanctity of family bonds. The rumor mill churned out lurid tales of her supposed affair with Henry's former tutor, the Marquis of Exeter, claiming they'd engaged in illicit trysts. While Henry was away on campaign, these whispers hinted at a web of deceit spun by Anne to secure the throne, portraying her as a scheming, power-hungry temptress. But the most audacious and damaging claim was that Anne had plotted to assassinate Henry, the very king who had made her queen. The scenario was as absurd as it was terrifying. Allegedly, Anne had solicited the help of 2 courtiers, Sir Thomas Bridges and Sir Francis Weston, to murder the king during a royal progress. Their supposed plan involved smothering Henry with a pillow while he slept, a grotesque fantasy that turned him into a monstrous villain. These rumors were no idle gossip. They were meticulously crafted weapons of propaganda, forged in the sinister workshops of Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister. Cromwell, a man of immense ambition and questionable morals, had long desired Anne's downfall. He understood the power of suggestion and used it masterfully to paint Anne as a threat to the crown and the realm, a dangerous seductress whose schemes and infidelities could not go unchecked. These rumors, once unleashed, took on a life of their own, amplified by the king's advisors, who saw in Cromwell's tale a convenient justification for their own designs. The whispers grew into a roar, drowning out any possibility of justice or fairness for the beleaguered queen. And, once the darling of the court, now found herself branded as a traitor and adulterer, a pariah whose name was synonymous with sin and disloyalty. This campaign of slander, vicious and unrelenting, was the final battle in the war waged against Anne. It was a war that Henry himself had declared and Cromwell had joined with a vengeance. But little did they know that Anne, despite the noose around her neck, had a few more tricks up her sleeve. To understand how Anne endured this psychological warfare, we must look at the rumors themselves and the methods used to spread them. Firstly, the accusations were carefully calibrated to strike at the core of Anne's reputation and Henry's ego. By suggesting that she had betrayed him with her own brother and others, Cromwell attacked her virtue and his own authority. Secondly, the timing of the rumors was crucial. With Anne already imprisoned and vulnerable, the accusations were released like venomous snakes, slithering into every crack of her already strained psyche. Finally, the rumors were disseminated through a combination of official channels, such as royal proclamations, and unofficial means, including anonymous letters and paid informants. This ensured that no one, from courtiers to commoners, was spared the salacious details of Anne's supposed crimes. The result was a maelstrom of scandal that engulfed Anne, leaving her isolated, vilified, and utterly alone. But amidst the cacophony, one question lingers. Why did Henry and Cromwell subject Anne to this brutal psychological campaign? And what does it reveal about the nature of their power? We'll explore these questions and more in our next video. Join us then as we uncover the darkness that lurked beneath the Tudor court and ask, what is the true cost of power? On May 19, 1536, Tower Green became a stage in one of history's most calculated acts of political theatre unfolded. The execution of Anne, but this was no ordinary punishment. Her beheading was a meticulously orchestrated spectacle designed to do more than punish a woman. It was meant to justify Henry VIII's ruthless decision to discard her, to cement his absolute authority and obliterate the influence of a woman who had dared to wield power. This was an execution designed to send a message, and it was one that resonated loudly through the ages. As the morning dawned, the sky seemed unnaturally bright, offering a cruel contrast to the dark drama about to unfold. Anne, once the crowned Queen of England, was led through the Tower's corridors, past courtiers who had bowed to her just 3 years prior. Now, they watched with cold indifference, their silence a testament to how far her fall from grace had been. The scaffold, deliberately low, at just 3 feet, stripped in of any remaining regal dignity. It forced her to ascend mere steps to reach the block, all the while facing a jeering crowd. This was no solemn affair. Historical accounts describe a carnival-like atmosphere with spectators encouraged to mock the fallen queen as a traitor and even a witch. Cheers echoed through the crowd, drowning out any dissent or shred of sympathy. And this wasn't just a random gathering. Henry's agents had seeded the crowd with his supporters, ensuring the king's narrative wouldn't be challenged. Every detail of this public spectacle had been designed to humiliate and to instill fear. The French swordsman who carried out the execution was summoned from Calais at great expense, not because Henry was magnanimous enough to grant a swift death, but to ensure a flawless performance, a clean strike that would owe the audience. The time of the execution, mid-morning, ensured maximum attendance, with church bells tolling her death across London. The doubled Tower garrison and extra guards were there to maintain order or protect the Queen's family, but to intimidate, silencing any sympathetic onlookers. Henry's absence from the execution, as he reveled in his betrothal to Jane Seymour at Whitehall Palace, spoke volumes. He wasn't there to dispense justice or show mercy. He was there to put on display the power he wielded over life and death. For Henry, Anne was nothing more than a pawn in his game of political chess. Her removal was necessary to secure his dynasty and advance his interests. To achieve that end, he had woven a web of lies, painting her as a threat to the very fabric of society. The charges against her, adultery, incest, and conspiracy, were not only false, but so outlandish they served not to convict but to defend. They portrayed Anne as a moral threat, justifying her downfall to a public once charmed by her wit and intelligence. With Anne out of the picture, Henry set his sights on his daughter, Elizabeth, declaring her illegitimate and stripping her of status. This move was crucial to extinguishing Anne's bloodline and ensuring no future claimant could argue a legitimate right to the throne. In the aftermath of the execution, Henry's propagandists went into overdrive, commissioning poems that branded Anne as an adulteress and denigrated her memory. Her portraits were destroyed, and her name was banned from courtly discourse. This was character assassination on a grand scale, designed to nullify a woman who had reshaped England's religion and politics. Yet amidst this orchestrated spectacle of humiliation and death, Anne's final speech offered a glimmer of defiance. When asked if she had any last words, she spoke of Henry as a gentle sovereign, praising him right to the end, perhaps as a last act of devotion, perhaps as a way to ensure the safety of her family. But in that same breath, she refused to confess guilt to the charges leveled against her. In doing so, she subtly rejected the script that Henry had written for her, asserting her innocence even in the face of her own mortality. Anne Boleyn's execution was more than just a death. It was a warning, a resounding declaration that power resided solely in the hands of the king. By staging this macabre spectacle, Henry VIII didn't just kill a woman. He erased a legacy and cast a long shadow over the halls of power, reminding all who dared to dream of greatness that ambition could lead to ruin. Her story serves as a timeless cautionary tale, a reminder that sometimes the pursuit of power leads to the most horrifying of consequences. Thanks for watching. In the heart of 16th century England, a shadow fell across the kingdom. The mighty King Henry VIII, renowned for his 6 marriages, was on a mission to wed again. But But his path was fraught with a formidable challenge, a former queen named Anne Boleyn, who stood as both a legal and emotional obstacle in his way. As we all know, there are two sides to every story, and while Anne is often portrayed as a tragic victim, some historians argue that she played her cards wrong and sealed her own fate. So what did Anne do that made Henry so determined to marry someone else? Let's find out. When Anne first entered the picture, she was just another woman in Henry's vast court. However, soon, their relationship took a turn, as they shared a deep connection, and the king found himself captivated by her charm. As weeks turned into months, their bond grew stronger, and Henry began to feel an overwhelming desire to marry her. But there was one major problem. At that time, Henry was still married to Catherine of Aragon. Despite their childless union, he couldn't bring himself to divorce her, so he turned to the head of the Catholic Church, Pope Clement VII, for permission to annul the marriage. But the Pope refused, citing Catherine's close ties to the influential Borgia family and concerns about the legitimacy of a papal annul. Determined to have his way, Henry decided to defy the Church and break away from the Roman Catholic Church. With the help of his trusted advisor, Thomas Cromwell, Henry established a new church with himself as its head and annulled his marriage to Catherine, paving the way for a union with Anne. Their wedding took place on January 25, 1533, and Anne was crowned queen a few months later on June. However, cracks began to show in their relationship almost immediately. Henry's advisors, including the Duke of Norfolk and Stephen Gardiner, urged him to end the marriage, claiming that Anne was unfit to be a queen, because she had once had a relationship with her brother. Anne's failure to produce a male heir also fueled rumors that she was unable to bear children. Eventually, Thomas Cromwell convinced Henry that Anne was guilty of adultery and treason, and the king ordered her arrest. On May 2, 1536, Anne was taken to the Tower of London, where she spent her last 17 days alive. She was charged with adultery, incest, and conspiracy to kill the king, all charges which she denied. However, Henry was determined to make an example of her, and he delayed her execution several times, just to prolong her agony. Finally, on May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn was beheaded in the Tower of London. But here's the thing, folks, many historians argue that Anne actually played a role in her downfall. You see, when Henry first started showing interest in her, she could have easily resisted his advances and stayed out of the spotlight. But instead, she basked in the attention and allowed herself to become the center of the king's obsession. When Henry decided to marry her, Anne could have been more cautious and tried to navigate the complexities of the royal court. But instead, she went ahead with the wedding and eventually became queen. But even after becoming queen, she didn't seem satisfied and started plotting with her brother and others to get rid of Henry and replace him with her son. This is the reason why Henry was so angry with her and wanted to marry someone else. He felt betrayed by her and wanted to punish her for her actions. Anne's story is a reminder that sometimes our own choices can lead to our downfall. No matter how powerful or popular we may be, we should always remember to stay humble and grounded. So what do you think? Was Anne Boleyn right to resist Henry VIII? Or should she have accepted his proposal and become his second wife? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. On May 19, 1536, as Anne Boleyn knelt on Tower Green, awaiting her fate, a lone figure stood poised above her, ready to end her life. This was no ordinary individual. He was a master swordsman who had been summoned all the way from Calais at the behest of Henry VIII. His sole purpose, to deliver Anne's death sentence with a flourish. This chilling spectacle wasn't about mercy or compassion. It was a meticulously staged theatrical performance designed to drive home the finality of Anne's fate and to showcase the absolute power of the king. Henry VIII wasn't just a ruthless monarch, he was also a master showman and a keen observer of how his actions were perceived by his subjects. He understood the power of spectacle and he used it to great effect during Anne's execution. But why did he choose a French swordsman to carry out this grim task? What was the significance of bringing in a foreigner to do the job that could have been done by an Englishman? Traditional English beheadings were carried out with an axe, a weapon associated with butchers and the common criminals. The process was brutal, often taking several strikes to separate the head from the body. And it was messy, a gruesome display that could stir pity or even anger among the spectators. Henry, however, wanted a more elegant, more theatrical finish for his fallen queen. He opted for the French sword, a weapon of speed and precision, designed for a single, clean stroke. But why a French sword and a French swordsman? The answer lies in the calculated theatricality of it all. A French sword was not just a means to kill, it was a symbol of refinement, of a style favored by the French monarchy. By choosing a French sword, Henry was elevating Anne's execution to the level of an aristocratic event. And who better to wield such a sword than a Frenchman? This was no local hangman or butcher with a bloodlust. He was a professional, a specialist in the art of decapitation. Someone whose skill with the blade was so renowned that a king's ransom was placed on his head literally. He arrived in England with much fanfare, lodging at the king's own expense at the Tower of London, fit for a man of his supposed caliber. Historical records suggest he spent several days practicing on animals, perfecting his technique and ensuring that when it came to an he would not falter. But what was this executioner like? How did Anne's family and friends describe him? Unfortunately, we have little to go on, except for the accounts of those who saw him in action. Some described him as cold and emotionless, while others spoke of his technical proficiency, noting the elegance and precision with which he carried out his grisly task. But whatever his demeanor, he was clearly a man in demand. Following Anne's execution, he was said to have carried out several more beheadings, each one as swift and clean as the last. The story goes that Anne, blindfolded, as was the custom in France, held her ground, standing upright as she awaited her death. She was said to have strained to hear the sound of the blade as it approached, listening intently as the crowd held their breath. When the sword struck, there was a gasp, quickly followed by a stunned silence. The crowd had witnessed a near-perfect execution. Why then did Henry bring in this specialist from France? Why not use an English sword and executioner? The answer is simple: control. Henry wanted a flawless execution, a clean, swift stroke that would leave no room for error or sympathy. And he knew that by bringing in a specialist, by hiring the best, he would get exactly what he wanted. Anne's execution was a public affair, a spectacle designed to send a message not just to Anne but to all of England. With this elaborate production, Henry showcased his absolute power, leaving no doubt in anyone's mind who was in charge. For Anne, however, this show of power was a final indignity, a last-minute humiliation at the hands of a complete stranger. She faced death not just as a Queen of England, but as an object of the king's obsession, a pawn in his game of power and control. Her execution was a public spectacle, her head quite literally the main event, and Henry, the showman king, had made sure that every detail, every gruesome detail, was absolutely perfect. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it. Your support helps us bring these historical tales to life for even more people. Thanks for watching. In the dim oil lamplight of an almost empty Tower of London's cell, on the evening of May 19, 1536, sat Anne Boleyn, awaiting her imminent demise. By her side were two ladies in waiting, whose somber task it was to sit with their imprisoned mistress until the very end. What must have been a terrifying ordeal for the ladies in waiting was made the more unnerving by the composure of their queen. As the minutes ticked by and the time of Anne's execution drew near, she conversed with her ladies in waiting, laughing and joking as though she were not about to meet her grisly end on the executioner's block. According to one account, she remarked that she would soon be Anne sans tête, or Anne without a head, far from being terrified, and appeared cheerful throughout. How can we make sense of Anne's behavior? Why did she behave so strangely when confronted with death? How did her ladies-in-waiting react to such eerie composure? And how does it compare to similar cases today? All these questions will be answered in today's episode. What makes Anne's behavior so disturbing is that it directly contradicts what we would expect from someone in her position. After 17 days in imprisonment, having endured relentless accusations and knowing her impending doom, she should have been a wreck, a nervous, tearful mess. Yet, according to the records, Anne was anything but. She moved through her cell with grace, her voice steady and strong. Even as her world crumbled around her, she found solace in dark humor, masking her terror with jokes about her imminent demise. Her behavior was so erratic that some observers might have mistaken it for madness. But Anne was no fool. She understood the gravity of her situation and the horror of her fate. As the time of her execution neared, she knew that she was walking into a trap, a carefully orchestrated humiliation designed by her former lover, King Henry VIII. He wanted her dead, but he also wanted to make an example of her, to send a message to any who might oppose him. That was why the execution was public, why the scaffold was deliberately low, and why the French swordsman was given jeering instructions. It was a spectacle, a brutal display of power meant to break in both physically and psychologically. Yet she met it with a chilling calm. Her composure was not bravery, nor was it a sign of peace. It was something far more complex, a desperate attempt to survive the ordeal intact. Anne's behavior in the tower was a form of dissociation, a mental escape that allowed her to survive the nightmare of her imprisonment and execution. It was a way of coping with the unbearable, a retreat into a place where logic and reason could not reach her. She was checked out mentally, emotionally numbed to the horror of her situation. When Anne joked about her headless fate, she was not being brave. She was terrified. Her humor was a shield, a way of keeping the terror at bay. It was a fleeting moment of defiance against a fate she could not escape. In those final moments, Anne's dissociation served her well. It allowed her to walk to the scaffold without breaking down, to deliver her final speech praising Henry without a tremor in her voice. But it could not erase the horror of those final moments, when a queen's wit became her last defense against oblivion. It is important to note that Anne was not the only one who exhibited strange behavior in the face of death. Today, modern psychologists have documented numerous cases of dissociation in individuals facing life-threatening situations. It is a common response to extreme stress, a way of coping with the overwhelming emotions that accompany the knowledge of one's impending demise. Some people may seem calm and collected, while others may break down and cry or scream. All of these reactions are normal and understandable given the circumstances. As we reflect on Anne Boleyn's story, let us remember that behind the historical accounts and legends, there was a real person, a human being who loved and laughed, who feared and cried. Her story is a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the lengths to which we will go to survive. It is also a reminder of the importance of treating others with compassion and understanding, especially in times of great suffering. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. In the spring of 1536, Anne Boleyn, once England's dazzling queen, faced a barrage of accusations so vile they seemed torn from a fevered nightmare. Charged with adultery, incest with her brother George, and plotting to murder Henry VIII, she stood condemned not by truth but by lies woven to destroy her reputation and pave the way for her execution on May 19, 1536. These fabricated allegations, orchestrated by Henry's cunning minister Thomas Cromwell, were not meant to prove guilt but to smear a woman whose power and influence had become a threat, ensuring her death would be seen as just retribution for a traitor's sins. But what exactly did these charges look like? How were they constructed to bring down one of England's most powerful women? And what does this tell us about the lengths to which her enemies would go to silence her? The charges against Anne were as audacious as they were baseless. Known for her sharp wit and charm, Anne was accused of illicit affairs with multiple men, including Mark Smeaton, a lowly court musician, and Henry Norris, a nobleman. Most shocking was the claim of incest with George Boleyn, her own brother, a scandalous lie that horrified even Tudor sensibilities. The final accusation, conspiring to kill the king, branded her a regicide, sealing her fate as a traitor. Historical records show no credible evidence to support these claims. The confessions of Anne's alleged lovers were extracted either through torture or promises of mercy, while the timeline of events surrounding the alleged trysts defy logic and common sense. For instance, Anne's brother George was supposedly serving as her agent in France during the time the two were accused of committing incest. Furthermore, the timing of the alleged affair between Anne and Mark, set during a period when she was at Windsor while he was performing in Greenwich, is also highly suspect. These inconsistencies only highlight the true purpose of these accusations. They were not crafted to prove guilt, but to paint Anne as a moral abomination whose death would cleanse the realm. But who was behind this campaign of slander and why? Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister, was the architect of Anne's downfall. A master manipulator, Cromwell orchestrated a media blitz of pamphlets and broadsides that paraded the accusations as established facts. These were plastered on public buildings, whispered in taverns, and preached from church pulpits, turning a once-beloved queen into a pariah. Cromwell also ensured that Anne's supposed lovers were paraded through the streets. Their trials rushed to ensure that they would set the stage for her own execution. All the while, Anne was confined to the Tower of London, forced to watch her reputation being shredded beyond repair. She heard the taunts and jeers of Londoners passing by her window, knowing that they believed every word of Cromwell's propaganda. To make matters worse, Cromwell allowed rumors to spread that the young Princess Elizabeth, Anne's daughter, was illegitimate, born of a tryst between Anne and her brother George. He hoped that by casting doubt on Elizabeth's parents, he could secure the throne for Henry's new wife, Catherine Howard, and her future children. But perhaps most disturbing was the manner in which Cromwell and his allies profited from Anne's disgrace. Once the accusations were made, members of Parliament, judges, lawyers, and even priests saw financial gain in aligning themselves with the party that would bring down the Queen. For many, it was a chance to advance their careers by tearing down one of Henry's most trusted advisors. As the net tightened around Anne, she knew her defense was futile. The king had already made up his mind, and the court would do his bidding. No matter how brilliant her mind, how quick her wit, the deck was stacked against her. On May 1536, Anna's brother George, along with the alleged lovers, Henry Norris and Mark Smeaton, were executed. 2 days later, Anne herself faced the block. Her head, severed from her body, was displayed on the Tower Green, a grim spectacle for all of London to see. The accusations that had condemned her, a barrage of lies, became the basis for her legend. Anne's story serves as a reminder of the abuse of power, the dangers of unchecked ambition, and the enduring strength of a woman who refused to let her truth be buried. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn, England's fallen queen, faced a fate far crueler than the swordsman's blade. Her execution was the crescendo of a vicious campaign to erase her from history, orchestrated by Henry VIII to nullify her contributions, delegitimize her daughter Elizabeth, and silence a woman whose power had threatened his throne. From the suffocating confines of the Tower of London to the jeering crowd on Tower Green, Anne's final moments were a masterclass in psychological warfare, public humiliation, and political theater. Yet, in her quiet defiance and haunting resilience, she left an indelible mark, defying a king's attempt to obliterate her legacy. Hello and welcome to the channel. Today we will explore the disturbing depths to which Henry VIII descended to execute his former wife, Anne Boleyn. If you love learning about the strange, scary, and sometimes sad events that have shaped our world, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now, let's get into today's video. In May 1536, England's King Henry VIII had fallen head over heels in love with a young woman named Jane Seymour. But there was a small problem. He was still married to his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, who was refusing to give him a divorce. So Henry decided that if he couldn't get a divorce, he would just find a new wife. And that's when he set his sights on Anne Boleyn, a beautiful and charismatic woman who was currently employed as a lady-in-waiting to Catherine. Henry was so infatuated with Anne that he was willing to do whatever it took to win her hand in marriage, even break away from the Catholic Church and start his own religion. And so it was that Anne and Henry were married in secret in January 1533, just a few months after meeting. At first, everything seemed to be going well for Anne. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl in September and was crowned queen in December. But Henry soon became obsessed with the idea of having a male heir, and Anne was unable to give him one. Additionally, Anne's personality and intelligence intimidated Henry, and he began to resent her. In May 1536, Henry accused Anne of adultery, incest, and treason, and he had her arrested and taken to the Tower of London. Despite the lack of evidence against her, Anne was convicted and sentenced to death. As Anne sat in her cell in the Tower of London, she knew that her time was running out, but she also knew that she had one last chance to defend herself. When the time came for her trial, however, Anne's pleas of innocence fell on deaf ears. The jury found her guilty on all counts, and the judge, Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury, sentenced her to death. Anne's final appeal was to Henry himself, but he was determined to get rid of her, and he refused to listen. On May 19, 1536, Anne was led out of the Tower of London to the place of execution. The scaffold had been deliberately constructed low, only 3 feet high, to make it appear more vulnerable. A crowd of people had gathered to watch the execution, and many of them were there because they had been paid by Henry to attend. Once Anne reached the scaffold, she was stripped of her clothing and tied to the block. Her head was then placed on a velvet cushion, and the executioner leaned in and cut off her head. Anne's body was then chopped up and burned, and her ashes were scattered in the River Thames. From the beginning of her trial until her execution, Anne had been denied access to a lawyer, and had not been allowed to see any witnesses against her. Furthermore, during her trial, she had been forced to stand for long periods of time without any food or water. She was also forced to wear shackles and chains, and she was not permitted to sit down. In addition to these physical hardships, Anne was also subjected to a great deal of psychological torture. She was kept in solitary confinement for most of her trial, and when she was allowed out of her cell, she was paraded through the streets of London in front of a large crowd of people who jeered and shouted insults at her. Anne's mental state began to deteriorate as a result of the abuse, and she started to hallucinate and have nervous fits. After Anne's execution, Henry VIII married his mistress, Jane Seymour, who did give him a son, but she died shortly after childbirth. Over time, Henry's obsession with having a male heir and his paranoia about Anne's supposed infidelities faded, and he came to regret his decision to execute her. However, it was too late. Anne was dead and could not be brought back to life. Her daughter, Elizabeth, who had been declared illegitimate, grew up believing that her mother was a traitor who had been executed for her crimes. However, when Elizabeth became queen, she reversed her mother's conviction and restored Anne's title as queen. She also founded a new religion known as Anglicanism, which combined elements of Catholicism and Protestantism. In recent years, historians have re-examined the evidence against Anne and concluded that she was innocent of the charges of adultery and incest. It is now believed that Henry's desire to get rid of Anne was the real motivation behind her execution. Anne Boleyn was a true victim of circumstance. She was a beautiful and intelligent woman who was married to a powerful king. However, she was ultimately betrayed by the same man and executed for crimes that she did not commit. Her story is a reminder that even those with great power and privilege are not immune to the machinations of those who seek to take advantage of them. Henry's brutal disregard for Anne, in her final moments, choosing not to witness her execution, was a calculated move to sever ties with her definitively. By staying away, he avoided any implication of mercy, ensuring the impression of absolute finality. The king's absence transformed the scaffold into a stage, amplifying the drama of Anne's demise for the crowd and solidifying the image of a heartless monarch. Henry's calculated absence turned Anne's execution into a public spectacle, reinforcing his resolve and leaving no doubt in anyone's mind that he had washed his hands of her. The scaffold where Anne lost her head was designed to humiliate, its diminutive height robbing her of any sense of regality. The low platform ensured she was exposed and vulnerable to the jeers of a crowd egged on by Henry's agents. This was no accident, but a deliberate attempt to strip Anne of her dignity in her final moments. Unlike legendary executions, there was no towering platform, no sense of solemnity, just a low, insulting stage for a queen's demise. The scaffold's design was a silent accomplice to her humiliation, ensuring Anne's final moments were marred by public shame. Yet, in this shameful scene, Anne's composure becomes even more striking. As she faced the music masterfully navigating the treacherous waters of her final speech, her words were both a political statement and a testament to her spirit. By acknowledging the law and avoiding confessions, she subtly challenged her charges. Praising Henry while protecting Elizabeth showcased her courage and love for her daughter, even in defeat, and retained agency, defying the narrative that branded her a traitor. If you enjoyed this, look at the dark side of history. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to stay informed about our latest episodes. Thanks for watching. On May 19, 1536, Tower Green bore witness to a scene of unspeakable horror. The execution of Anne Boleyn, England's disgraced queen. Her death was no mere judicial act, but a grotesque spectacle, designed to crush her spirit, erase her legacy, and instill fear in all who watched. From the chilling moment of her beheading, to the callous handling of her remains, Henry VIII's campaign to obliterate and extended beyond her life, leaving scars on those who witnessed her fall. Yet, in the face of this brutality, Anne's enduring presence haunts history, a testament to a woman who could not be fully erased. As the mid-morning sun cast its harsh light on Tower Green, Anne Boleyn knelt upright, a French tradition that demanded superhuman composure. Blindfolded, her lips moved in fervent prayer, her hands clutching a rosary as she braced for the unknown. The French swordsman, summoned from Calais at Henry's lavish expense, stood ready, his blade gleaming with lethal precision. The crowd, a seething mass of jeers and gasps, fell briefly silent as he raised his sword. In a single, swift stroke, Anne's head fell, blood spurting onto the stroke of its scaffold. But the true horror was yet to unfold. Witnesses recoiled in terror as Anne's severed head, lifted aloft by the executioner, revealed a ghastly sight. Her eyes, wide and darting, seemed to scan the crowd. Her lips, stained with whispered prayers, twitched as if forming words. Medical knowledge, even in Tudor times, suggested a severed head could retain consciousness for up to 30 seconds, a fleeting window where Anne might have sensed her own decapitation. This physiological nightmare, her face animated in death, sent several onlookers fainting, others turning away in dread. The executioner's display, a ritual to confirm the sentence, became a moment of visceral horror, etching Anne's final seconds into the memories of all present. Her death was not just a political necessity, but a spectacle of cruelty, designed to shock and subdue. Anne's muffled cries, her last-minute pleas for mercy, and most horrifyingly, The animated state of her severed head served to torment her spectators. They were forced to confront the reality of death up close, a brutal reminder of the finality of the king's decision. This was no gentle demise. It was a public spectacle intended to awe and terrify the observers into submission and obedience to the crown. Anne's horrified gasps, the blood-soaked executioner, and the sight of her lifeless, yet expressive face combined to create an image seared into the minds of those present, an image that would likely haunt their dreams, and perhaps influence their actions for the remainder of their lives. The trauma of witnessing such a spectacle did not end with the event itself. Those who had observed Anne's execution, especially her ladies-in-waiting, grappled with the psychological aftermath of what they had seen. The vividness of the experience likely led to long-term emotional and psychological repercussions. For many, merely witnessing an execution was traumatic enough. But in Anne's case, the circumstances added another layer of horror. The ladies-in-waiting were not just spectators. They were tasked with handling Anne's remains, including her still warm and bloodied head, a duty that would have intensified their emotional response and left them with indelible psychological scars. Furthermore, the atmosphere of fear and secrecy surrounding Anne's trial and execution likely heightened the trauma. These women were not only dealing with the emotional toll of witnessing a gruesome event, but also contending with a sense of uncertainty and fear. They knew that Henry was capable of eliminating anyone who crossed him and that they themselves could be next. The relentless pressure to maintain secrecy would have added to their emotional burden, making it all the more difficult for them to cope with what they had seen and experienced. Given the lack of records specifically addressing their mental health, we can only speculate about how they coped. Some may have turned to religion for solace, seeking comfort and healing through prayer and faith. Others may have withdrawn into themselves, struggling silently with the trauma and finding it impossible to discuss what had happened. Sadly, there are instances of ladies-in-waiting dying shortly after, which could be attributed to the stress and trauma they endured. The lack of historical records regarding their mental well-being highlights the need for further research and understanding of the often overlooked human cost of such historical events. No dignity awaited Anne in death. No coffin had been prepared, a shocking oversight that spoke volumes about Henry's contempt. Her ladies-in-waiting, overcome with grief and horror, scrambled to find a makeshift solution, settling on an old arrow chest too short for her body, forcing her head to be tucked beside her torso. This crude vessel, more suited for weapons than a queen, was a final act of without a proper Christian burial. Anne's remains were hastily interred in an unmarked grave beneath the floor of the Tower's chapel. St. Peter ad Vinc. No prayers, no rites, no marker honored her passing. This neglect was deliberate. Henry sought not just to kill Anne but to erase her as if she had never existed. The absence of a coffin, the rushed burial, the unmarked gravel were calculated to reduce a crowned queen to an afterthought, a political problem swiftly discarded. The arrow chest, a grim symbol of her disposability, underscored the brutality of a king who saw her death as a mere stepping stone to his next marriage. Anne's burial was not an oversight but a statement. Her life, her reign, her very humanity were to be forgotten. Henry's campaign to erase and extended far beyond the scaffold. Determined to wipe her from history, he ordered the destruction of her portraits, once proudly displayed in royal palaces. Her royal emblems, falcons, initials entwined with Henry's, were sanded from tapestries and burned from records. Courtiers were forbidden to speak her name, lest they incur royal wrath. Anne's daughter, Elizabeth, not yet 3, was declared illegitimate, stripped of her title, and relegated to obscurity. Her household dissolved, and her status reduced to that of a bastard. This systematic purge was chillingly effective, nearly succeeding in erasing a queen who had reshaped England's destiny. Henry's propagandists fueled the narrative, commissioning verses that branded an adulteress and which, rewriting her story as a cautionary tale. Official accounts recast her execution as a necessary cleansing, her death a triumph of royal justice. By destroying her image and silencing her name, Henry sought to nullify her contributions to her role in the English Reformation. Yet, the ferocity of this erasure betrayed his fear. Anne's legacy, embodied in Elizabeth, would one day eclipse his own. His vendetta was not just against a woman but against a power he could not fully control. In the aftermath of Anne Boleyn's execution, a profound sense of unease and fear settled over the court. The chilling spectacle of her death, coupled with Henry's subsequent actions to erase her memory, created an atmosphere of dread and uncertainty. This trauma did not dissipate with time, but rather permeated various aspects of court life. The spectre of Anne's demise loomed over those in the king's inner circle, serving as a constant reminder of their precarious position and the ruthlessness of the crown. This pervasive fear had far-reaching consequences, stifling open discourse and dissent within the court. The trauma associated with Anne's execution fostered a culture of silence and obedience. Nobles, courtiers, and advisors became hesitant to express their opinions or challenge the king's decisions, fearing that any opposition would be perceived as disloyalty. This created a climate of conformity where flattery and subservience were highly valued and critical thinking was discouraged. As a result, Henry's court became a breeding ground for sycophancy and deceit, where individuals competed for the king's favor while suppressing their true thoughts and emotions. The trauma also manifested in a heightened sense of paranoia and suspicion. The systematic erasure of Anne's legacy and the swiftness of her downfall instilled in the court a deep-rooted paranoia. The nobility began to view each other with suspicion, constantly on the lookout for signs of disloyalty or treachery. This atmosphere of mistrust eroded the sense of camaraderie and cooperation that had once existed among the courtiers, replacing it with cutthroat competition and backstabbing. Consequently, the effectiveness of the court as a governing body was compromised, hindered by the inability of its members to work together openly and honestly. Henry's court, once a seat of power and prestige, became a battleground of hidden agendas and covert schemes, forever tainted by the trauma of Anne Boleyn's fate. Anne Boleyn's execution was a calculated act of erasure, from the horror of her final seconds to the indignity of her burial and the purge of her legacy. Henry sought to reduce her to nothing, a queen forgotten in an unmarked grave. Yet the trauma etched into her witnesses, the subtle defiance of her unconfessed guilt, and the triumph of Elizabeth I's reign ensured Anne's story survived. The arrow chest, the destroyed portraits, the silenced voices, they could not fully extinguish her. Anne's execution is a chilling reminder of power's ability to rewrite history, but also of a woman's resilience, whose truth, battered but unbroken, whispers through the ages. If you liked this video, please leave a like and watch another one. On May 1536, Queen Anne Boleyn walked onto the scaffold in the shadow of London's Tower of London, her head held high despite the noose around her neck. With each step, she moved closer to a horrific end, and though she had heard rumors of what awaited her, nothing could prepare her for the brutal reality of her execution. The May morning dawned warm, too warm for such an early hour. It promised a sweltering day, the kind where the stench of stale waste clung to the narrow streets of 16th century London. But Anne seemed oblivious to the heat, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. She was on her way to the notorious Tower Green, a patch of grass so named ironically, for it was the site of numerous executions. The grass, trampled by centuries of condemned souls, offered no solace. Soon, it would stain red again. As Anne stepped onto the scaffold, her heart sank. Despite its grassy name, there was nothing verdant about Tower Green. For one, the scaffold loomed like a gallows, a stark wooden frame drenched in the grime of countless executions. The air hung heavy, thick with the metallic temps of blood and the stench of decaying flesh. Flies buzzed insistently, drawn to the ever-present scent of death that clung to the scaffold. These details weren't mere background. They were a gruesome introduction to her fate. Each creak of the scaffold, every rustle of the hangman's ropes echoed her impending doom. Yet, she was determined to face it, dressed in black, save for a white underrobe, and looked every inch the queen she was. Even in death, she refused to be cowed, though she had spent weeks pacing her cell, rehearsing her final speech. Now faced with the gaping maw of the gallows, words failed her. The sight before her, the smell that assaulted her nostrils, the murmurs of the crowd pressing close, all conspired to steal her voice. It was a cruel twist of fate that on this day, words, her greatest weapon, deserted her. But Anne was not alone. Beside her stood an array of figures, some there by duty, others by morbid curiosity. Among them, Stephen Gardiner, Bishop of Winchester, his face pale, his hands clasped tightly. He represented the church that had once championed her cause, but now abandoned her to the executioner's block. Then there was Sir Thomas Bridges, Constable of the Tower, his face impassive, his gaze fixed on the scaffold. His duty was clear, to ensure, but beneath his stoic exterior, did a flicker of sympathy stir. Finally, there was Dr. Edmund Custis, physician to the king. His presence, a grim reminder of the fate that awaited. His task, to pronounce Anne dead, to confirm what was already evident. These figures, with their varied motivations, formed a macabre audience to Anne's final act. They witnessed not just an execution, but the unmaking of a queen. And then it began. The slow, agonizing ritual that was Anne's execution. The velvet cap was placed on her head, its plush material, a stark contrast to the roughness of the block. The hood concealed her face, muffling her sobs. Her hands, once those of a queen, were tied securing her to the scaffold. All around, the crowd stirred, their whispers intensifying. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. For Anne, the wait was torture, a torment of anticipation. Then, with a jerk, the cap was pulled away, revealing her tearful face. She raised her head, her gaze met in the crowd's, and spoke. Her voice, though shaky, rang with defiance. She delivered a short speech, elegant, composed, her words echoing the principles she held dear. But her composure was a veneer. Beneath it, fear coiled. She knew her words could not alter her fate. As the executioner approached, his face hidden behind a mask, he raised his sword, his glint momentarily catching the sun. The crowd gasped, but Anne remained steadfast. Her time had come, and she would face it without flinching. With a deep breath, she bowed her head, her neck exposed, offering herself to the blade. The executioner hesitated, a brief pause in the grim drama. Then, with a swift, decisive stroke, he brought the sword down. Now, what do you think? Let us know in the comments below. But don't stop there. We also want to hear your thoughts on what do you find most intriguing about Anne Boleyn's story. Your comments might just spark an exciting discussion. And while you're at it, don't forget to stay updated. There's more historical tales and mysteries waiting to be uncovered. And if you enjoy our content, consider supporting us. It means the world to us. Now let's delve deeper into the annals of history. Who was Anne Boleyn? Why was she executed? And how did her demise shape England's future?